Hey everyone, I'm super excited to bring one of my favorite people in the world. He has a heart of gold and you're mission driven, you're a servant leader and obviously like really inspiring person and just doing a lot of like yeah, you're definitely going far. You're already going far and you're going places for sure. So just excited to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, man. Amazing introduction, brother. I'm, I'm on a soundbite that. I'm a soundbite that.
Yeah, so Myron is a RVP in the nonprofit sector within Salesforce. A lot of the members in the Untap Your Sales Potential community are from Salesforce, so it's just cool to. I feel like I'm like an almost like an honorary Salesforce employee because I hear about it and talk about it all day. So it's cool to be a part of the community.
No, it really is. It feels like so many people at Salesforce, in the program, but the program there as well. There, so that was one of the main reasons I signed up for Ian as well. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the podcast. Is just Ian's ability not to just talk about tech, but talk about sales and Salesforce and kind of the different models that we all have there. It feels like it's natural, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to have you on this episode. So today we're gonna talk about imposter syndrome, some of the little nuances that come with being a person of color, especially and you moved into management as well. So
Yep.
um, it, I'm sure that's a path that people are thinking about at some point. And we'll also cover. I mean, you're very involved as well. I feel like you have your own podcast. Like,
Yep.
you're an entrepreneur. You've created a lot of different communities. So, time management is probably something a lot of people are curious about. If they were in your shoes, like, hey, how do you have time to do all this? I'm sure it's a common question. So, a lot of good insights from this conversation for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm excited for today. I know this is something that we've talked about for a while. And obviously, you've been on my podcast, I've been on your podcast as well there. So I feel like these are just regular conversations, right, between friends. So we've got a lot to cover,
Hmm.
but these are all just natural things I think we talk about day to day throughout our friendship.
Yeah, it's cool. It's like networking is weird because you just never know. And sometimes it's like, oh, should I make time for it? Like, oh, I should really
Yeah.
focus on like my job. And it's like one of those
Yeah.
things that and some people love to network and some people don't. Like they're I would say like just focus on quote unquote revenue generating activities.
Yep.
But I always get a lot of value just meeting people from all over, right? It's like one of those
Yeah.
things that you just don't know who you're gonna meet.
You have to. I think it can be an RGA from the perspective that you learn from other people, right? You're making great connections. You never know who other people know as well. So there's just so many things to network for. And I think, as you kind of talk about, just the intentionality behind it makes it so important because, networking is so helpful when people know what you're looking for to some degree. You're like, hey, I'm here because I'm looking to learn about this, or I'm looking to break into this thing, right? That just makes it so much better and more impactful.
Hmm. Yeah. And the good thing about the community, the Untap Your Sales Potential, like there's such a high caliber of people as well.
Yeah. Yep.
So because it's people who are really committed to growth and getting better and just having being a sponge as well, right? So it
Yep.
weeds out people that maybe aren't as committed to that as well.
Yep, yep. No, I think you learned so much of the program, like you said, from Ian, from others, right? Which is actually one of the hidden values of it is like seeing how other people digest information and process it. Like some of the most value I got from it was like I think they were on Wednesdays, right? Where you'd have the full team there and you kind of go through some of the
Mm.
content live and you see how other people in different sectors or different areas of tech there, right, process and apply it. You get so much value from just seeing how that same information can be applied to different industries or different slugs in the rows there. So that was a hidden thing that isn't always talked about as much, but I think that community, that
Mm.
networking is actually really powerful.
Yeah, that's a good point. Most people, when they think of our training, it's more like, oh, I gotta make a lot of money, and
Yep.
a lot of the more typical masculine energy that comes with
Yep.
like, gotta make a million and gotta pound the phones and like let's hustle culture, right?
Yep.
But there's a lot of aspects of it that you don't think about. That's like, oh, like we're gonna dig into. my personal values, like and all
Yeah,
the things that I care about, and create a mission statement and all these other things as well, like beyond just the sales portion of it.
yeah, yeah. No, I think that's what's people can skip that part, right? And to your point about weeding people out, things like that. Like if you don't know why you're there, like it's not going to be helpful. And that's in sales, it's
Hmm.
in many things in life, right? But sales is such a challenging field. It's so rewarding that I think you have to have that why for yourself and your values and be the anchor on that. Because you're going to have days where it's like, wait, why am I in this there? So I love that
Hmm.
you get to that quickly within the program because if you don't have that, it's gonna come a time where you're gonna ask yourself, and it's better to know that answer early on versus like, well, I don't know.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. And so your career is interesting. I feel like you've
Yeah,
done like the whole spectrum in terms of like the life cycle of sales. So you've done
yeah,
the more technical side as a BDR, so more like the entry level, and then you
yeah,
moved to and you got promoted many, many times. So
yeah.
I think that's an interesting perspective as well because you've done it all. So it gives you sure perspective and have compassion for a lot of the counterparts that you may be working with, right?
Of course, man. I think for me, one of the books that got me into sales, I always talk about is The Sales Human with Daniel Pink, right? So that was a book I read in college where I was, studying mechanical engineering at the time, and it just re- relates to how everything in sales is moving people, everything in life, excuse me, is moving people. So from that perspective, everything is sales. Like babies cry because they want you to do something there, right? Or
Mm,
you're talking to a doctor and they might be selling you from buying one thing or another, but they're informing you on your options that solve this problem or pain or sickness or challenge that you're having there, right? So from that lens, everything is sales. And I always tell people that in relation to my career, that whether I was a BDR, obviously very directly tied to inside sales, but a success manager, a solution engineer, my most important thing I was always doing, no matter what my title was trying to figure out who I was helping and their pains and problems that they were trying to solve there. So that's just a way that I think
mm,
everyone can identify with this um, this career path we're on in sales is helping people solve problems. And as long as you're focused on that, frankly, whether you're in sales or not, I've seen those be the most impactful
mm,
and high growth people. I remember some of the mentors I had very early on in my career was like, dude, just find problems to solve that people really, really want to solve. And if you're doing
mm,
that, I don't care what title you're in, you're doing something really interesting, something's going to make an
mm.
impact there.
Yeah, easier said than done, right? Like I think
Yep.
we all know
Yep.
conceptually, like, oh yeah, well, I need to serve or I want to serve as many people as possible. But
Yep.
the ego sometimes takes a hold of us and we think of ourselves, whether we are conscious of it or not, right? And that
Yeah.
energy can either attract folks or can repel folks, right? Depending on
Yeah.
how conscious we are of the or how we're being in terms of working with clients, communicating with clients and partners and internally or externally.
It really can. I think that's one thing I appreciate through the program as well. So Ian always refers to it as commission breath, right? Like if you hop on the phone and you're like, you're buying XYZ product today, like, that no one wants to talk to that person, right? Like
Yeah.
that's not the energy that you want to put out there. And it's not as Ian always talks about, it's not a helping energy, right? Which I think is what you'll double click on is like that ego and balancing that from a perspective of actually helping how you talk about the problem, how you talk about the pain, how you take interest or curiosity in what's going on with someone else's life and what they're interested in doing. Like that subtle difference is the difference between people spending more time with you and talking about that versus like, oh my God, this person just wants to sell this little widget. And the
Hmm.
faster I get off the phone with them, I can get back to this thing I'm actually thinking about, right?
Yeah. I mean, so servant, so it you've always been a servant, I'm sure, right? Like you're naturally a very compassionate, kind person, a lot of empathy. What's the delicate balance between like being too nice,
Yeah,
right? Versus having a point of view, like because I do think every good top salesperson has a bit of that challenger within them
yeah.
as well, right? So what's your philosophy on that?
Yeah, I think it's redefining what help is for each person, right? So there's two ways to help, and it connects to ego as well. I love these conversations. um, if your gratification for helping is knowing that you responded to a need for someone and did exactly what they said they wanted to do, that's one way that people get gratification for helping. They feel that, they experience that in a way of, hey, I'm serving exactly the needs of what this person is saying, right? Another way that helps is what you maybe talk about in sales, or people talk about challenger sale. And I always relate this to being a success manager. Always, people think success is often just the, responsiveness. Is challenging people to become who they said they're going to become, or
Mm.
challenging people to anchor in their values, right? I talk a lot about therapy as well. As like, there's been times I go to my therapy sessions and my therapist would challenge me, and I was like, dude, I don't know if I want to go back next week. But she's helping me because she's not just responding to what Myron is saying. She's saying, Myron,
Yeah.
because you say XYZ is important, tell me
Mm.
how that reflects in your actions. Because you say that you
Mm.
value this, tell me how that
Yeah.
reflects in how you make these certain decisions. So it's a different way of helping, right? Because
Mm.
you're helping because you're keeping authenticity within that. You're helping
Mm.
because you're challenging that person to change themselves and see how committed they are to change themselves. So both
Yeah.
are helping. But I think when you think about sales, right, you have to be the second. You can't just help people who say, hey, I want, X product for X price, without knowing, well, why do you want that? Like, if you don't get it, what
Mm.
happens? Like, what pains and problems are you solving? Or what's happening in your organization? Or where would you like to be 10 years? All those different things that really anchor in your why and allow you to be very specific to that person, that organization. That's where you can
Mm.
actually challenge them to be that better version of themselves that they want to be for the
Mm.
future, not just who they are saying they want to be in that present moment.
Yeah, it's I think what you're saying is like people that aren't doing sales for a living probably don't realize like, there's the stereotype of a typical
Yeah.
salesperson. And if you were to think, oh, what's a typical salesperson talk like? Most people probably wouldn't think like the way that we're communicating, right?
Yep. Yep.
So it but obviously there's so many types of salespeople out there. What type of Enneagram are you again?
I believe I'm an INFP, INJ. Is it right? Yeah, I might need to go look up my
No, the
email.
Enneagram. Did you do that one? The Enneagram? It's like
I
type one, two, up to
I
nine.
I think I did. It's been a while, so I forgot the number.
Okay. No, I'm just curious. There's a helper one, that's why. So,
Yep.
um,
Yep.
yeah. So that might be maybe. We'll
I
see.
have to go look through my email now. I know I definitely took it.
No worries. Okay. Yeah. So yeah. It's funny because when you mentioned the therapist analogy, I'm like, oh, that's how I feel like with Ian a lot of times. It's like, ooh, that landed. Yep, that certainly landed.
I just found it. My top three were three, eight, one, and two. So it was achiever, challenger, reformer, and helper. Was my top.
Achiever was the number one. Oh,
Achiever,
that
challenger,
makes sense.
reformer, and helper. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. And
okay,
it came
very
from me in
cool.
two.
Yeah, yeah, that's why I asked. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, Achiever, that makes a lot of sense, right? Like you've been clearly been very successful in so many avenues. So yeah, it seems like this community there certainly attracts a lot of achievers for sure. And I'm sure Salesforce as well, right? Like
Hey,
naturally, like yeah.
you gotta grow, right? You gotta grow.
Yeah. Um, so I'm curious, like so congratulations. I know you've stepped into management. It probably feels like it's been a while too, right? So it's
Yeah.
like, yeah. Um, how do you feel like, even now that you've had some time and you've completed the program, like, do you feel like there's still aspects of it that you take with you even within this leadership role?
Yeah, absolutely. I think when I entered Ian's program, one of the biggest things we worked on was around prioritization, right? So you alluded to it already, like doing different things in life and managing time, doing different things in sales or a high growth company, right? You're going to have not necessarily competing priorities, but you're just not going to have time in the day to do all the things. So having that, again, as we talk about even with our customers, values or a lens or that filter, as different people talk about it, like, hey, what do I say yes to and prioritize higher versus what do I say maybe two if I have time for versus like, hey, I just can't really participate in that there. So those are as you work with the, as a seller, right? RGAs or lead gen activities of, finding pipeline, progressing pipeline, hopefully closing or getting that out there. That's very, very impactful for any seller, no matter what industry or role you're in. So for me, that was really helpful as an account executive, as a closer or seller there. This is some of the things I try to anchor on for my team as I coach them. It's like, hey, like,
Uh,
how are you anchoring your day to do these things?
hmm,
One of the biggest things I advocate for that came from the program as well is you spend the first hour of the day with yourself, right? Like the first hour before you even respond to Myron, frankly, as your leader, spend that with
hmm,
yourself.
hmm,
Figure out what's important to me today. What am I doing in terms of running my business? What's working well, what's working not. If I accomplish two or three things today, what kind of really understanding how you're shaping your day and shaping your time after that before you
hmm,
get responsive to all the different needs of Myron or this or that,
hmm,
knowing what you need for your business. That time is critical. It's
hmm.
sacred, almost, I'd say. And it
Yeah.
allows you to really be impactful towards the things that you say you want to
Hmm.
do, right?
Mm, brilliant. So, I mean, obviously it's helpful because you've actively applied it so you can say like, hey, this works, right? That this
Yeah,
is how I was able to be a top performer.
yeah,
But then parlaying that as like a leadership a leadership lesson or a
yeah.
framework that can help your team, that's awesome. I actually hadn't thought of it that way as a way of like, huh, okay.
Yeah. And
That's really cool.
it doesn't just help the team. I think the same, principles, apply to being a leader, right? You talk about the same feeling of there's so many asks on me. What do I
Mm,
prioritize? Anyone can identify with that. So as a leader, that changes a
mm,
little bit, right? Not much, but as a leader, I prioritize my people the most because that's what impacts, believe it or not, RGAs, that impacts the success of our customers, that impacts all these different things in the business. So I try to
mm,
prioritize my time spending it with people, so the people on my team, that's what people support my team and my customers there. So that's what really fills
mm,
my cup. That's what really impacts our business. And so for me, when
mm.
I'm spending that time in the morning, reviewing my business, reviewing my day, reviewing the metrics, I'm asking myself, who can I spend time with today? It's going to be to move these things forward in a positive way.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, and that applies for like everyone even outside of sales, right? Like to
Yeah,
your point, like even if you're not a people leader, it's still, hey, like we all have distractions. I mean, especially in today's age, right? It's like,
yeah.
oh man, like as much as I love LinkedIn, like, it's sometimes the biggest distraction, right? You're just like sometimes you're on there and then you're just reading these posts, you're just liking posts, and you're just like, wait,
Yeah.
well, okay, like let me get back to prospecting.
What did I even join this thing for, right? Like, I can't remember why I opened it.
Yeah, yeah. That's great. And then so you've created the C3 community as well.
Yeah,
Do you
yeah.
still have time for that? Even now that you have additional responsibilities, like is that still priority for you?
It is still a priority for me. It's definitely changed from when I launched it there. When I launched it, I was doing a very weekly release. I was actually talking to
Yeah.
Tanver about this not too long ago as well, to moving towards seasons, which I think he's done to some degree with even his
Hmm.
podcast there. So
Yeah.
I still have time for it. It's very near and dear to my heart. And for those who don't know, C3 stands for my own values. We talk about that often of clarity, connection, and co creation. And it's a time for you to talk with others about their values and how they've been successful through that. For
Hmm.
me, going towards a season approach, right, allows me to be able to connect with one-on-one with our guests in appropriate time. You'll have appropriate time to edit that and release that in a good schedule versus feeling like, oh my God, if I miss one day,
I know,
this
right?
whole thing crumbles. So it's a balance
Hmm.
there.
Yeah. I think as achievers, we're our own worst critic. Like
Yeah,
but there's it's like a double-edged sword, right? It's
yeah,
clearly created you to create so much, but there's also give us grace and there's different seasons. So I'm sure there's
yeah,
like I took a break from my podcasting for a while, and now that I'm
yeah.
back now here, I'm interviewing all the members, and it's been fun to get back on it. I'm like, oh man, like I missed this. This is great, It's nice. It's like a
Dude,
nice change of pace. Yeah.
I don't know anyone who's been podcasting for more than, I'd even say, 6 months to a year that hasn't had to take a break, right? Like you have the, as you mentioned, the
Yeah.
seasons, is the balances, reflecting what you can do in life at that time. And to your point as well, when you come back to it, it's like, oh, I miss this. I miss
Yeah.
it.
It's nice, right? It's like it's and it's like It's like the ultimate hack for networking too. Like you
Yeah,
just get to meet so many people.
yes, it's exactly what we talked about to start the episode, right? It's like having a conversation about the things you're going to talk about, meeting the people you're going to have that conversation with is such a human thing.
Hmm. So from your what have you learned as a podcaster that you didn't expect until now, like after, right? Like I'm sure because everyone always in life, I think we all think we only think about the positives, and then with
Hmm.
anything, there's nuance, there's pros and cons, there's shades of gray in it as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, believe it or not, it's podcasting for people. I know a lot of your audience are sellers there. It felt natural to me, right, going into it because you schedule this meeting, right? I even use different scheduling software to make sure people show up because sometimes you have no shows for podcasts. Um,
Oh
you
yeah,
have
yeah.
you have agendas, right, of the topics you're going to talk about with them. So it felt very much similar to what you're doing in terms of a sales meeting, but that
Hmm.
was something that you'll feel strong with and natural with if you've been in sales or interested in sales. The irony of it is that the best podcast episodes I had were the ones who I had an agenda for, but believe it or not, didn't stick too close to it, right? The
Huh.
episodes that I had that I felt were the strongest were the ones where I kind of rigidly try to keep people on track. The episodes I felt the
Uh,
best about were the ones where it's just like, I'm going to probably put 3 or 4 or 5 things on a piece of paper and kind of prepare my guests for it. But if you go
huh.
off the rails, you go off the rails and we'll see where it takes us. And we went to
Huh.
some very beautiful places on some of those podcasts that there's no way I could have prepared for. So that was a
Hmm.
surprise for me, right? Of like, hey, you prepare, but you don't hold it so on the tracks that you disregard what blessings or places you could potentially go in a conversation, right?
Hmm. Yeah, it's that I love that. Yeah, I think having some sort of baseline like frame like outline where it's like, hey, okay, these are like the buckets.
Yeah,
And I would say like similar, at least for a lot of my sales calls, similarly, right? It's like do enough prep so that,
yeah,
it's like, okay, I care, I know enough to be dangerous, but when I
yeah,
overly prep and then things don't go according to plan, I'm like, oh no, like I didn't ask that. And then I'm in my head too much instead of just like being
yeah,
with people, you know?
yeah. Dude, I think you said it perfectly. It's like getting out of your own head, knowing that you're prepared for it, but being present, being with people as those things actually come up there.
Yeah. And that's awesome. So, what advice would you have to folks that look at the sticker shock or look at the price tag on the website because
Yeah,
we post everything transparently
yeah,
and they're like Ian's a great guy but like hey like that's way out of my budget, right? Like that's way out of my right because I mean I'm pretty sure most people just don't have that amount of money just laying around, right? It's like
yeah,
you kind of have to there's a bit of skin in the game, right?
yeah. I would say to get started in the way that you can, right? For me, I was blessed to be able to come out of pocket for that. Even before, my organization, reimbursed some of it. Even when they did reimburse, it wasn't all of it, right? And the reason I felt comfortable starting was, again, there was amount of privilege or being blessed to be able to, invest there. But invest is what I would kind of double click on is to understand that this is just something you're paying for that's going to sit on, you know, a bookshelf in your house, right? That you'll never use. Like
Hmm.
this really is your career. And we talked about everything that's included with that from networking to different people there to opportunities to lessons and an application of that to connecting with someone who's done this successfully. Like how many times do you get learning and lessons from people who maybe haven't done it yet? It's like Ian's someone who's done it multiple years over years. So it's proven, right? You have a level of trust with it. So those different things really allowed me to process it and feel confident in proceeding with it from an investment standpoint. Um, and I really look back at that compared to my career, right? Kind of personal stories. I started Eames program after I was coming back into a closing account executive role before, right? I'd been a BDR, I've been an AE, closed in role before, wanted to learn different aspects of business, spend some time post-sales success, spent time pre-sales technical as a solution engineer. It was like, oh my God, I'm finally coming back to the AE, which is my role. I wanted to return to. I was intentionally coming back and did those things to run the business. It's like, I'm going all in on myself. And that all in
Hmm.
thing is something you'll hear Ian mention is like, you have to go all
Hmm.
in on yourself there. It's like, how how crappy would it have been if Myron spent all this time learning post and pre-sales and came back and didn't do good as AE? So it's like I'm not going to
Hmm.
leave a single stone unturned on
Hmm.
my return to AE and up market and with bigger accounts and all the kind of
Hmm.
achiever things that come with it. There's ego there too, right? There's
Hmm.
I'm not going to leave any stone unturned. So that was what for me was like, dude, like this guy's done it. He's proven. If I can just take the time to learn these skills and go all in on it, that there's
Hmm.
no way that this doesn't actually turn out for the best there. So
And clearly it's worked out for you, right?
I'd say it's worked out pretty well. I'd
I mean,
say I'd say it's worked out pretty damn well.
you're a pretty humble guy. Like, I mean, this is your, you know, how would you say you performed like compared to the average seller at Salesforce?
Yeah, I was top of the dash there for when I left the account executive role and moved into leadership there. And for me, and this is kind of one thing I coach my team on as well, is that it's not always the dash, right? So if you think about even how I talk about working with Ian or talk about sales, the feeling I got from being in the program, the feeling I got from having repeated success in sales was knowing I could do it and I could do it repeatedly, right? So I talk a lot about
Mm,
mental health as well, is that you can be in a position in sales where you're like, oh my God, I got this big deal from a flip or
mm,
SDR or sales or marketing, right? Um, and that's okay, right? We all get those. But what you want to be as a seller is maybe a bit more intrinsic, where you're saying, I know I can do these skills. I know I can run these plays. I know I can walk into the room and
mm,
do these things. So that skills based approach is what allows you, from a career perspective, to feel like, I don't care what my
mm,
territory is, where my team
mm,
is, what my industry is. Like, I know these, I have the toolkit, right? And because
mm,
of the toolkit, I can show up every day. And it might be a little bit different, but I know I can maneuver my way to success with that. So when I think
mm,
about the success, yes, there is definitely on the dashboard, but I always have to double click on double click for my team internally as well. There's like, think of sales as a career and know that, whether you end up here or here on the dashboard, what are you learning? What are you developing, right? Such that X amount of months, X amount of years from now, you'll always be able to do that thing that can,
mm,
translate to success for you. And once you have that
mm,
feeling, oh my,
mm,
that's where you want to be. That's a completely different experience, right? It also
mm,
allows you to be more externally facing as well, to think about other people, right? Because you're no
mm,
longer attached to that deal. That's one thing you'll hear Ian and Tanvir and team talk about as well. It's like, it's not one
mm,
deal you have to win or lose. It's like, because I have the skills and I can trust, I can find more deals. So I'm here to help you if it makes sense. If it
mm.
doesn't, I can make sure I can find something else that makes sense there.
That's brilliant. You're really connecting the dots for me. A lot of people that come through as leads like that fill out, hey, I want to learn more about the program. It's very common that they're like, hey, I'm not sure if I got lucky and I just had a
Yeah,
good year. And they're like,
yeah,
sometimes I feel like I'm at the right spot at the right time with the right
yeah.
leadership. And I'm like, are people just being like overly humble? Or is there like a sense of, to your point, like, okay, like let me build the skills to make sure that this is repeatable and it's not just like
Yeah,
a one-time thing. So you're really helping me see like, this is a very common use case actually. Yeah.
absolutely. It's the difference between feeling lucky but scared, or feeling thankful and somewhat enthusiastic about what tomorrow holds, because we might be doing something cool again.
Yeah. Hmm. Man, th this is great. You're a great leader. Well, yeah, you've done it as well, but it does
Yeah,
seem like you're helping them get skills that are transferable and you're not being too attached to the numbers and it's more like, hey, once you have a process, once you have the right behaviors, the right
yeah,
habits, the right discipline and focus, like that's more than half the battle, right? And then
absolutely,
execution, of course, is the other half of it as well, right?
absolutely.
I mean, what advice would you give to folks that they're learning a lot. Like they read all the books and like they listen to all the podcasts, but it's like they're just in that perpetual state of like learning, but there's still the taking action portion that is missing. For some reason, a lot of my friends or people in my life are in that world.
Yeah, I can get there too myself, right? I'm not above that. For me, it's kind of understanding like why, right? Kind of talk about the values and where you want to be as well. There's like, do you want to be the person who has the knowledge but hasn't done it? Do you want to be the person who can answer the questions, that can carry the conversation about XYZ topic? Or do you want to be the person who actually can talk about what their experience was with that, knowing that the only way to talk about that experience is you probably got a couple, hiccups along the way. You probably some bruises, some
Mm,
bumps there. That's like, oh, dude, I definitely this went terribly wrong there. But that these are the differences you have to actually. So like, no one can answer that, but that individual person, right? That's interested in these things. So it's not by any means bad to
Mm,
have that interest, but kind of tap into yourself in that deeper question of like, why am I learning this? Am I learning this just for knowledge, to be to talk about it, or am I learning it because I actually want to try this, because I actually want to do this, and that will actually inform if if you should actually continue on the path you're going on.
mm.
It's the same thing with our customers. I'll even connect that as well. In sales, you'll see customers who want to know all the things about the product, but
Yeah, we meet. There's a lot of people, a lot, right? Especially if you get inbound. Especially if your role specifically
yep,
does get a ton of inbounds. Like inbounds are notorious for like just research over analyzing, and you're just like, dude, like, is this serious or not? Like, just yeah, just give it to me straight. Like,
they've
yeah,
got a spreadsheet, features functionality, price differences,
pricing, yeah,
future roadmap, all these different technical things, and it's like you may almost know more than this I do, right? Agnostic of who has more knowledge here, is this actually going to get done? So
yeah.
that's the critical question: is do you actually want to do this? And it's different than if you want to know about it.
Yeah, and that in itself is sometimes difficult to teach reps, right? It's
Yep.
honestly prior to, I mean, Ian obviously drills it into our head like, hey, don't waste your
Yep.
time. But I do think 80% of more junior reps or folks that just have happy ears, like,
Yeah.
we've all been, I mean, we've all been guilty of it, right? Like just having
It's the
pipeline for
only
the
way to
sake.
learn.
Yeah, it just and it's like, hey, how do I discern like what are actually real ops versus people that are just like window shopping or people that are just like wasting our time essentially, right?
it's it's everything we talked about so far in the podcast about learning to learn versus learning to do, right? It's the why of what you're doing as well there. It's the qualification is kind of what we're all coming down to as well. It's like it's even the helping, right? It all leads to the same thing of how you process the helping, how the customer processes the help they'd like to receive. Would you like to be just answer the questions, right? You say this, I go do it, right? You say I want to learn about the features and storage of this thing, I go respond with the features and storage of this thing, but no one ever asks a important question of why do we care, right? There's better
Yeah,
ways to say it. Maybe that's
yeah.
a very poignant way of saying it, but like so what? Like, if we find out the answer to this, how is this going to impact you personally or your business there? So,
Mm,
if we don't find out, is there repercussions of that, right? And getting to
yeah.
that solving, getting to that helping, that isn't just helping, but it's really helping someone
Mm,
change, right? That committed to change is something important that I
mm,
talk about with my team is we're here to help customers that are committed to change. We're here to help
mm,
customers that are committed to improving their mission. But if you just
mm,
have the help without the commitment, that gets you in some very weird spots.
mm. Yeah, I mean, it goes back to your first point, right? Where you went all in. You're like, hey, I'm gonna all in, even if it's scary to kind of put my credit card down or
Yep,
it's like there's no way I'm failing. And
yep,
to your point, you want to work with customers who also are all in.
yeah,
Like this matters. There's like an executive who cares about this. This is not just
yep,
a low level person that's just like, hey, like I don't have time for that. Like you do that, but it's
yep.
like this is actually we're committed to this. It's more of just like figuring out who's the best vendor for us, who's the best partner for us.
And it's so natural to not just sales, but any profession, right? Again, mental health stuff there. Whether you go to a doctor, whether you go to a therapist, wherever you go, they'll qualify you if you pay attention. If
Mm,
anyone's ever gone to the doctor office, they've got a treatment
mm,
for XYZ, they'll ask you things like, how long have you had this for? What have you tried before?
mm,
What is your plan to, how quickly do you want to get better there? Same thing if you go to a therapist, like, hey, what are you dealing with? What's your plan to get better? What's your commitment to getting better, right? Because what we're going to be doing in therapy probably isn't easy, right? So you realize that
mm,
even in these helping fields, that they're using this methodology to understand what's your commitment to change. So even as
mm,
sellers, right, we can go about it in a very thoughtful, mindful manner, but it's the same exact conversation of it's not just knowing about change, but understanding that person's intrinsic why, and if they really are committed to getting better, committing to change, committing to going through with the project, committing to making an impact on their mission or the business, that has to be
Mm.
sussed out relatively quickly, no matter what field you're actually in there.
Mm. Yeah, it all comes together. This is brilliant. Well, Myron, I really appreciate this. This has been amazing. Oh, a couple more questions. I'm
Yeah,
curious, what are your thoughts on I had a leader once that I asked why aren't there more people of color on the
yeah,
team, right? And
yeah,
she was just like, "Hey, like I just hire the best that come my way, you know.
yeah,
It's not like I'm actively seeking." And that definitely, rubbed me the wrong way, you
yeah,
know.
yeah,
But what are your tips on, maybe I'm a people leader like yourself, I'm a sales leader, and I obviously I want to have a good team where we're
yeah,
crushing our numbers. Like how would I go about even thinking about like, hey, how to bring in diversity, even if it's not people of color, like just
yeah,
diversity of thoughts,
yeah.
experiences, like in diversity in general.
Yeah, I think you have to value it, right? So it goes back to everything we talked about before. Is one thing to say, "Hey, I'm interested in diversity. I've read the book," but it's like, do I value it enough to actually seek that out? To actually maybe go to places where people either don't look like me, right, or they don't think like me, right? Even for me coming into a sales work with an SC or success perspective, right? There's people who are like, "Wait, this guy might just this guy might just be only doing post sales or technical stuff there." So that was a
Hmm.
challenge I had to overcome, right? But I'm thankful that I had trust from different sales leaders to actually do different things from that perspective. But you have to be in a
Hmm.
position where you're actually actively seeking out that diversity and knowing that that's only going to be beneficial. And one of the things I always relate that to, or for my personal life, is whenever I was interviewing in different roles there, I'd always reach out to the sales leader or the particular leader. I'd always reach out to their team, maybe their AEs in their team there. And the reason I did that is that it was very clear for me that there was no one thing that worked for everyone, right? So even now, when people reach out, "Oh, Myron, I'd like to be promoted to XYZ role. Like, what are your tips?" My first question is typically, "Well, where do you want to go? Like, who do you want to work for? Like, what industry, what team, what type of accounts, what customers, how big, how like all these different things are impactful because no one thing is going to work for everyone." And I relate that to what we're talking about diversity to say that if you have a team that all thinks the same way, unless you close only people who connect with that way of selling, that methodology, that way of life, you're going to be
Yeah,
incredibly
good
successful
luck.
at that one thing, right?
Yeah,
But for all the
yeah.
other many shades of people, whether it be shades of skin color or thought or life, you're not going to
Hmm.
do well because you didn't consider what they were thinking about. So that's the value of diversity and why you really want to.
Hmm.
Because yes, you may think like you, but did you think about if this person doesn't think like you, how do you communicate with them and how you actually provide value to them? That's why you actually
Hmm.
have those diversity conversations and be thoughtful and
Hmm.
intentional about reaching out with that.
Wow. That's so insightful. Man, you have so much wisdom. Another question that's kind of tangential, in terms of mental health.
Yeah,
It's no secret that I think, I mean, ever since the pandemic, right? I think it's
yeah,
just accelerated that. I mean, maybe it was always there, but I think the pandemic, it just made it a lot more well known.
yeah,
Um, a lot of salespeople are burning out, and
yeah,
it seems like they're seeking something.
yeah.
If whether you've been in sales for the 30 years or you've been in sales for 6 years, like how would you suggest like taking care of your well-being or mental health so that it's a marathon, not a sprint, right?
No, man, I think it, life is funny. The marathon versus sprint thing I identify with more now than I have in many years because I got into running like 2 or 3 years ago, right? And I was always a sprinter before that, both in
Huh.
physical sprinting and growing up. I was big into basketball and running sports
Um,
there, along with just how I approached even sales, right? It was very much like
hmm.
a volume based, speed based approach there. Um, Marathons are different. I had a running coach actually on my podcast as well there when he was creating my training plan for long distance running, he set consistent, achievable goals, right? They weren't too low that I was like, oh, dude, I can go out there and run for 5 minutes and be done. They
Mm.
weren't go out there and run for 3 minutes, 3 hours every day. It was somewhere about running about 45 minutes to an hour every day. And there were different paces some days. There was different effort levels some days. And every day that I did it, I would log it. He'd give me a thumbs up, ask me how it went,
Mm.
give me that gratification. And I'm saying that in the sprint versus marathon approach, and then that's what the experiences is, right? So often as sellers, we can maybe just go all in our motivation, right? Oh my God, I'm going to make 1,000 calls today because I feel motivated today. And I can guarantee you, if not the next day, the third day, you're going to be like, I want to make zero because I just burnt myself out in 2 or 3 days. And all
Yeah.
this connects to even what you talk about with Ian and skills, and what we talked about earlier about having that trust and know the different plays you can run and positioning your time and things like that as well. Of how can I set consistent, achievable goals for myself there in life, right? And that doesn't just have to be sales. We talked about that for quite a bit in this like the conversation. That could be for your mental health, right? Can I go to my therapist once a month, right? Twice a month? Can I go to the gym 3 times a week? Right? Can I make time for these things I know are going to fill my cup in different areas as a whole person, not just as a professional, not just as a mom, as a dad, as
Mm.
an athlete, right? Can I make time consistently to do these things? And am I setting that in a way that isn't too small or too high, right? So I think that all comes down to the awareness and self reflection of those things, along with setting those goals, along with having accountability if you need it, right? I've had the accountability for a lot of things. Running, I got a running coach because I was not going to get up and run myself, but I knew
Yeah.
I wanted to do it, but I needed the push.
Mm.
Um, so those are things I think are really helpful for people is just to understand your whole person and make time for it to set those goals in the right way, right?
Mm. Wow. This is so insightful and so applicable for anyone, right? Even people outside of sales. Thank you so much, Myron. Really appreciate you. I'm glad the universe connected us together, that I met you through the community. And I'm excited to see how many more impactful conversations and just your legacy, your reach, the way you're being leading by example, and the humility too, right? You're so wise, and I feel like the smartest people are always the ones that just are open to learning from everyone. Really appreciate you.
I appreciate you more than you know, Davis, and I'm happy to come on this podcast or anything else again. I just appreciate our conversations. You definitely teach me a lot and provide a lot of insight to my role and to my growth as well. And I just learned a lot from speaking with you as well there. So thank you for the invite. I know this is just one of many conversations that we have, even was recording line or
Mm.
not. But I can't say how much I appreciate you as a person and what you're doing, what
Oh,
you're putting out in the world, the connections you've made as well there. So just keep going, man. Just keep going.
oh, thank you.